I'm in a bit of a reflective mood today. It's my last sermon here at Beth Tikvah. I like that answer for now. Thinking about my journey to the rabbinate, my first 5 years as a rabbi, it's been on my mind. It's truly been a pleasure serving alongside an incredible team of clergy, of professional staff, of lay volunteers, and everyone else here at the synagogue. Now, many of you probably don't know this about me. I don't really talk about it very often, but I'm not originally from Toronto. I was born in a far away place, a small village, Los Angeles. When Rabbi Grover first convinced me to come to Toronto for a weekend to see the community, he told me it was a place where I would have opportunities to learn and grow as a rabbi that I wouldn't find elsewhere. And he was really, really correct. He was 100% right. It's been an incredible experience being part of the Beth Tikvah community. I've had the opportunity to learn from some of the best clergy that there are and to work with a congregation that truly cares. A community that cares deeply about Judaism, about bridging the past and the present, and a community that truly treats its clergy like teachers rather than a commodity. A community that's allowed me to both learn and to grow, to make mistakes and encourage me to try again. I feel incredibly lucky and blessed to have been part of the Beth Tikvah story. To have had my name written somewhere in the many pages and chapters of what is a rich story, spanning more than half a century, and that I know will continue long into the future, as you, your children, and your grandchildren continue to write that story. In my own time, in my own story at Beth Tikvah, the shul has become a major part of my own life, an essential part of my story, as it too continues to unfold and grow. So I thought, as my last sermon, I'd reflect a little bit. And I know we're used to that. That's what the whole last book of the Torah is Moses' final sermon, his final reflection. And I promise I'm not going to go on quite as long. But I might repeat a few things you've heard me say in the past. When I think back on rabbinical school, I remember that a teacher of mine said that every rabbi really only has 2 or 3 pieces of Torah. The really good ones might give sermons and classes and lectures that wrap it up in a different wrapper, the clothing on it, and make it sound each week like it's something new, but at the heart of it, every rabbi, he said, really has 2 or 3 pieces of Torah that they teach and they preach and that really guides their rabbinate. So I've been reflecting on that, thinking, what are my pieces of Torah? What are the central lessons, the teachings of our tradition that motivate me, that frame the work I do as a rabbi, and also the person that I am, or perhaps more honestly, try to be? So I want to turn to our Parsha. In our Parsha this week, we receive some of the laws of Passover. We've had them before, but there's a bit of a repetition. V'yasu b'nei Yisrael et ha-Pesach b'moado. Let the Israelite people offer the Pesach sacrifice at its set time. Then it goes on in the next verse. B'arba'a aser yom b'chodesh hazeh bein ha'arbayim tasu oto b'moado. You shall offer on the 14th day of the month, of this month, at twilight, at its set time. You shall offer it in accordance with its rules and its rites. The mitzvah, the commandment, is very clear. There is a set time. There is a set day for the Pesach sacrifice. It is very important. It's integral to the commandment, it sounds like. It repeats over and over the time. And then you have to do it b'mo'ado, in its time. So what happens in our Parsha after Moses announces this? Some of the Israelites go to him and ask, what about us? What about those of us who are ritually impure when that time comes, who are unable to offer the sacrifice because someone in our home has passed away, it's because something beyond no fault of our own has made us unable to participate in this ritual at its time? Do we miss this opportunity to perform a mitzvah, to partake in this act? On a simple level, it's a question about fairness. And anyone who spends time around kids has heard them complain. It's not fair. It's a natural reaction to things. And we think about that as sometimes a childish thing, right? Fairness. The world is unfair. But fairness, it's a deep ethical question. And this, then, is not just a question about fairness, it's a moral question. Should those Israelites, should those people be punished for something that was beyond their control? And Moses seems to agree. He doesn't send them away saying the Torah is very clear. Ta'asu oto b'moado. That's the commandment. Do it at its time or don't do it at all. He goes and he asks God, what about them? And this is where God replies with one of the parts of our tradition that I think we've mostly forgotten about. It's become calendar trivia or a side note. Pesach Sheni, a second Passover. It happens after the first one, so those who are unable to do the sacrifice and partake in the rituals have an opportunity to participate. And this is the first essential piece of Torah to me. Halakha must be ethical. God gave the law, the command clearly and unequivocally. Do this at a time. But human beings noted that God's law, God's commandment, had an ethical flaw. It didn't account for people who could not participate through no fault of their own. There was a moral consideration that the law, the commandment, did not take into account. And Moses brings it to God, and God comes back, and the law has changed. Nobody shook their hands and said, what can we do? It's God's law. It's not for us to understand. Moses didn't tell them to quit complaining. If God gave this command, it's got to be correct. God is perfect. It's your human intuitions about morality and right and wrong, your limited knowledge that is flawed, not the law. And the Torah is full of examples of this, from Abraham to the daughters of Zelophehad, the rabbinic sources in ancient times, how they approached capital punishment, how they dealt with slavery, how they dealt with all sorts of issues in the Mishnah and Gemara. Throughout the centuries of the rabbinic codes, they've addressed and updated the law when it felt unethical, when it collided with their moral intuitions. Halakha must be ethical. The second piece of Torah is found in God's answer to the Israelites' moral objection. They ask about people who are ritually impure through no fault of their own. Someone in their household has died, so they cannot partake in the sacrifice. But God responds to their complaint with Pesach Sheni for those who are ritually impure, but also those who are b'derech rechoka, who are on a long journey. Not those who were in the first category, who couldn't participate because of something they couldn't control, but those who seemingly decided Pesach was a good time to take a trip, go on a vacation. They chose to take the trip. How is that a moral consideration? Why should the law change to let them have a second chance? So the answer to this can be found in how the rabbis understood what that meant, a long journey. The rabbis, as rabbis and Jews like to do, debate it. They have different answers. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva suggests that it's anyone who is further from the temple at the time of the sacrifice than the distance between Jerusalem and the city of Moadim. If you're further than that distance, you're on a long journey, and you can come for the second Pesach. But it's Rabbi Eliezer who has a very interesting answer. He says anyone who is outside the threshold of the temple. You could be standing right outside the door, and you could participate in Pesach Sheni if you don't take the one single step it would take to come in. Now, why did they get that opportunity? That's a choice, right? I know it's more of a choice to exclude yourself from the sacrifice, from the ritual, than standing one step outside the door and not coming in. It seems like an easy step to take. Rabbeinu Bachia tells us that distance is subjective. That's the lesson. What seems far away to one person could be very close for another. And in this case, the law accounts for that. A person's individual subjective experience. For that person standing one step out the door, it might seem like an easy step to the rest of us, but for them, there's something holding them back from taking it. It's a long distance. Chizkuni, another commentator, explains that it's a spiritual distance. The second Pesach includes someone not physically far from the temple, but who feels spiritually distanced from Judaism, estranged from God, from the tradition, from the community, and because of that, chooses not to participate in the first Passover. These answers, I think, are important and fascinating. The complaint is about those who cannot participate for reasons beyond their control, and God answers them with something that includes those who simply choose not to participate. It's an embodiment of a verse we find in Devarim. Lo bashamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven, it's not beyond the sea. Ki karov elecha, it is within your reach. Judaism is meant to be within our reach. Pesach Sheni teaches that Torah, that Jewish law and practice have to be accessible for Jews, for the Jewish people. It's not like other laws that are objective, withdrawn from the realm of humanity, or other religious laws that are about submission, where the rule sits in some divine vacuum away from the real lived experience of human beings. The Torah tells us the law must be achievable. It cannot demand more than a person can handle. It's subjective. It depends on a person's individual experiences, their relationship with God, with Torah, with the Jewish people. Halakha, Jewish practice, is not universal. It demands different outcomes from different people. And Pesach Sheni is the second chance for those who don't feel the command of the law. God gives them a different option. So that's my second piece. Halakha isn't made in a vacuum. It's not a universal law applied on a person, but it's created in a relationship between each individual and their particular circumstances and their relationship to the Jewish people of past, present, and future, to God, to Torah. And the third piece of Torah is perhaps the most obvious one from the passage. The law can change. Halakha changes slowly throughout the centuries, responding to the needs and realities of each generation. Sometimes it can also change in a moment, responding to the immediate needs of the person to whom it applies. In one verse, the law is given very, very clearly and repeated again and again and again. Ta'asu oto b'moado. Do it at a specific time. And just a verse or so later, it develops and it changes. It's my third piece of Torah. Halakha, Torah, Judaism is ever changing and developing. And this teacher told me that every rabbi has 2 or 3 pieces of Torah that underline their rabbinate. And I know I'm told sometimes that I repeat myself up here. And when I look at these 3 pieces, they're really all, I think, a repetition of each other. They're one and the same. There's one central message, one teaching, one piece of Torah that I think has guided not just my rabbinate, but it's been my own Jewish journey, my lived experience. Authentic Judaism is not a static thing. Authentic Judaism is not easily defined because it consists of different things at different places and time in our history. It means different things to different Jews, and there's no single practice or answer to any Jewish question. So this, most of all, is my Torah. Do not let those who forget this get away with it. Do not let those who allow Judaism to become rote obedience to law claim that they are the defenders of it. Do not let those who teach that halakha requires people to give up their moral instincts claim to be the ones who are protecting Jewish practice and tradition. Our tradition is a rich river that flows from the time of creation, through the patriarchs and the matriarchs, through bondage in Egypt and our exodus, from Mount Sinai and our wanderings in the desert to the land of Israel, and from our expulsion to all the different places we've called home over the centuries and millennia throughout the world. And it flows from today and this moment into the future. And what happens with the river? If you capture a little piece of it, it's really not the river anymore. When you take a cup or a bucket full, however much you take from that sample is a small part of it. When you let the water sit there and stagnate, it goes bad. Do not let those who allow Jewish practice to stagnate, who allow Jewish ritual and Jewish teaching to rot, claim to be the ones who are keeping Judaism alive. They're not the protectors of it. They're the ones who will lead to its destruction. We have tens of thousands of Jews every day, every year, whatever the numbers are. 1 in 4, their religion is none. They find no connection, no meaning in our tradition, because the traditions they're being offered are left in a time and a place that is not theirs, a reality that is not theirs. And if we want to be protectors of Judaism, protectors of halakha, of Torah, we have to make sure that Torah and Jewish practice exist, not just for the people who find meaning in the traditional ways, but also for the generations that don't. Shabbat Shalom.